Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you a reflection on the gospel on this 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time. You know, in the 3rd century BC, the Chinese philosopher Mencius, when he was reflecting on human relationships and how people treat one another, he wrote, "To feed men and not respect them is to treat them as if they were barnyard cattle. To love men and not respect them is to treat them as if they were a household pet." So the question emerges from those comments: how is it that we treat people? Well, today in the gospel we have the famous story of the 10 lepers who come to Jesus to be healed. And Jesus heals them and then sends them off, according to the law of Moses, to present themselves to the priests in the temple in Jerusalem. Because, as was written in the book of Leviticus, if someone had a terrible skin disease like leprosy, they were exiled from the community and they had to live out in the countryside in the caves for fear of contaminating others. But if they were somehow cured, what they had to do was present themselves to the priest. The priest would examine them to make sure that they were indeed cured, and if so, then they were allowed to return into the community and live a normal life as with everyone else. So, what Jesus was saying to them was just simply Mosaic law. Go show yourself to the priests. But there was a problem. One of those lepers was a Samaritan, and he couldn't go to Jerusalem into the temple to show himself to the priests because, first of all, he was a Samaritan, and they did not allow Samaritans into the temple. It was only for Jews. And secondly, Jews worshipped at the temple, and that's where they believed God dwelled. Samaritans did not. Samaritans worshipped on Mount Gerizim, where they believed God dwelled. So, where was this Samaritan going to find the presence of God where he could go and worship? Well, as we see in the story, he came to realize that God dwelled not in the temple in Jerusalem, nor on Mount Gerizim. Rather, God was dwelling in the very person of Jesus, so he returned to Jesus and threw himself on the ground and gave thanks, gratitude to God, because it was from God that all blessings flow, and they came through Jesus to him, and he gave thanks to Jesus for what was done. He recognized that Jesus was a way of thinking about it was the holy ground where one would go to find God and one would be in his presence. Jesus was that holy ground, the new meeting place between God and man. And what was it that made Jesus that holy ground? Well, the one thing that's so unique about Jesus, we can refer to him as the reverencer of people. Jesus reverenced people. He reverenced all the people that he met because he could see in them what God sees in them. And that is, all were sons and daughters of God. And so he would reverence the old woman who was bleeding terribly and pushed her way through the crowd to touch the hem of his garment in hopes of being healed. He could reverence her rather than reject her. He could reverence all of the lepers and the cripples and the lame. Ordinarily, people wouldn't want to be with them, let alone touch them. He could reverence them. He reverenced the tax collectors that people shunned. He reverenced the centurions that people despised. He reverenced the adulteress that people wanted to stone. He reverenced Judas, who betrayed him, and Peter, who abandoned him. Jesus had this vision of God that God possessed, and he reverenced all people. And it is that which made him holy ground, where people knew they could come and encounter God. And we, his disciples, we are called to be the same. We are called to be the reverencer of people. And how do we begin doing something like that? Well, I think back to a baptism I did a while ago, and you know, in the baptism, you can tell very quickly if babies love their baths, because when the water hits their forehead, they luxuriate. And you can tell the ones who do not like their baths, because when that water hits their forehead, they let go. So I was doing this baptism, and Dad was holding the baby, and I had the water and was saying, I baptize you in the name of the Father. And as I poured the water on the baby's head, the baby just suddenly went, it was like it was in nirvana. And we all burst out laughing at the baby's reaction, because it was just so tender. It drew us all in. And I was thinking in that moment, wouldn't it be wonderful if, just as when Jesus was baptized and came out of the Jordan and a voice from heaven, God said, "This is my beloved Son." Wouldn't it be fantastic? It's an impossible idea, I know, but wouldn't it be fantastic if every time a little boy, little girl was baptized, a voice from heaven would say, "This is my beloved Son, my beloved daughter." If we were to hear such a voice, we would reverence that child. We couldn't help but. We would see that child as God sees that child, as a child of God. And it would change the way we would do everything. We would change the way we feed them, we discipline them, we raise them, everything. And we could never not see that child as a child of God, having heard that voice. That's how we begin to reverence people. We see everyone, all men and women, as children of God. And we see them as that, and we reverence them. And we do our level best not to do the opposite, not to treat people with disdain or disrespect. I received this email with a link. It was from a Catholic organization that was warning people that this certain political party, that they were evil and that they were under the influence of Satan. I mean, does that sound like people who are reverencing people? We are called to reverence people, whether they are friend or enemy. We're called to reverence them how well we know them or how well we do not. We are called to reverence everyone. And again, how do we do that? It begins, I believe, as Father Chuck Gallagher, a Jesuit priest, once wrote, when we approach people, we do not approach them saying, "You bums," but rather, "We lepers." We, as it were, walk a mile in their shoes. We place ourselves into their circumstances, just as Jesus did. And we begin to see the struggles in their life, and we see the crosses they carry. And it becomes so much easier to be able to reverence them. And that's how we do it. We reverence them, the ones who so richly deserve it and need it. And we reverence those who are so far from being people, men and women, who deserve such care. We reverence everyone. And if we do that as disciples of Jesus, if we reverence as best we can with all of our weaknesses and all of our limitations, all the people whom we meet, husbands reverencing their wives and wives their husbands, and parents to their children, that we reverence them as we see the presence of God within them, and as we see ourselves one with them in their struggles. We see ourselves as we lepers. If we do that, well, even without realizing it, what we become is what Jesus was. We become holy ground to which people will come so they can be at one with God.